Eleanor sat by the window of her small apartment, the city lights casting a dim glow on her face. In her hands, she held a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Across the digital world, she watched. She watched his achievements, his words, his growth. She read his posts, saw his successes, and in silence, she celebrated them. Yet she never reached out. Many would assume she was bitter, that she held grudges, or that her pride forbade her from rekindling a lost connection. But that was far from the truth. Eleanor was a student of Stoicism, a practitioner of inner peace and self-discipline. She had long since learned the art of detachment, not from people, but from the expectations she once had of them. She had walked the road of emotional dependence before. She had known what it was like to measure her worth by the presence of another, to feel validated only through the attention of someone else. But those days were behind her. Now she understood that true strength lies in independence, in the ability to stand alone without wavering. The lessons of distance. There was a time when Eleanor would have sent a message in an instant, when excitement, sadness, or longing dictated her actions. But through time and experience, she had come to understand a crucial lesson. Not all connections are meant to be rekindled. Some belong to a past version of oneself, a version that no longer exists. To attempt to bring them back is to resist the natural flow of life. Her silence was not fueled by pain, but by wisdom. She did not reach out because she understood the value of self-sufficiency. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Eleanor took this to heart. If he wished to speak, he would. If not, she would accept it without resentment. There were times she wondered if he ever thought of her, if he scrolled through old conversations the way she once did. But those thoughts, too, she learned to let go of. Clinging to them would mean resisting what was, and Stoicism had taught her that suffering is often found in resistance to reality, rather than in reality itself. She had learned that emotions, like waves, would rise and fall. They were not meant to be controlled, but observed. When longing knocked at her door, she greeted it with understanding, not resistance. She allowed herself to feel, but never to act without wisdom. Some nights, she would stare at the ceiling, reminiscing about the past. The laughter, the conversations, the late-night talks that once seemed infinite. But she knew better than to dwell there. The past was a place to visit, not to live in. Growth does not require validation. There was once a time when she sought external validation. A simple message from someone from her past could uplift her spirits or cast her into a storm of overthinking. But as she embraced Stoicism, she learned that true confidence comes from within. She did not need a response, an acknowledgement, or a sign. She watched, but only as an observer, detached from expectation. Epictetus taught, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." Eleanor had applied this philosophy to relationships. She no longer wanted recognition or reciprocation. Her satisfaction came from knowing that she had given her best in the past, and now she could let go. She had spent years chasing closure from people who had already moved on. But closure, she realized, was not something another person could grant her. It was a decision she made for herself. She chose to close the door on what once was, not out of resentment, but out of acceptance that life continues forward. She found fulfillment in her own journey, in the books she read, the lessons she learned, and the peace she cultivated within herself. She became a woman who no longer needed others to define her growth. Her strength lay in her ability to walk alone without feeling lost. She poured herself into her passions, into learning, into becoming the best version of herself, and in doing so, she found a happiness that did not depend on anyone else. The strength in silence. People often misunderstand silence. They believe it to be indifference, a lack of care, or even cowardice. But silence is, at times, the greatest form of wisdom. It is the decision to resist the impulse of unnecessary words, It is the acknowledgement that not every thought needs to be voiced, and not every emotion needs to be acted upon. Eleanor knew that if she reached out, it would be for herself, not for him, and that was reason enough not to. To act out of impulse is to be controlled by it. She had trained herself to choose her actions, not be enslaved by fleeting emotions. With time, she found a sense of freedom in her silence. She no longer felt the need to prove her growth, to explain her absence, or to justify her choices. She had become the kind of person who moved forward without looking back, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for the natural course of life. She built a life that was full, not of nostalgia, but of purpose. She traveled, she learned. She helped others who were still trapped in the cycle of seeking validation. In doing so, she found a deeper sense of peace, one that could not be shaken by the presence or absence of another. She no longer needed someone to acknowledge her journey. Her journey was hers alone. And that was enough. A Stoic's farewell. As she took one last sip of her tea, she smiled. She did not need to send a message, nor did she need closure. She had already found it within herself. She had already said goodbye, not in words, but in acceptance. She would continue watching, not with yearning, but with quiet admiration. And if one day the universe willed their paths to cross again, she would greet him with the same warmth that Stoicism had taught her to carry in her heart, a warmth that expected nothing in return. As she stood, she glanced one last time at the glowing screen before turning it off. A symbol of the past fading into darkness, there was no bitterness in her heart, no longing in her soul. Only gratitude for the lessons learned, and a quiet understanding that some people are meant to be a chapter, not the whole story. She stepped out into the world, her heart light, her mind clear. The city stretched before her, filled with endless possibilities. She no longer dwelled on what was or what could have been. She had mastered the art of being present, of embracing life as it unfolded. And so, she put down her cup, took a deep breath, and stepped forward, not into the past, but into the present, where she truly belonged. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely, beautifully free. She was no longer watching. She was living. Nathan sat at his desk, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at an old conversation, one that had ended without closure. Across the digital world, he watched. He saw her success, her adventures, her new life unfolding without him. Yet he never reached out. Many would assume he was holding on to pride, that he was afraid of rejection or unwilling to mend broken ties. But that was not the truth. Nathan had spent years cultivating a mindset of resilience, of accepting what is rather than longing for what was. He had learned the value of stillness, of silence, of allowing life to move forward without interference. Lessons in letting go. There was a time when Nathan would have reacted differently. He would have sent a message, eager for validation, desperate for a response that might mend the distance. But time had shaped him differently. He had come to understand that not all stories needed an epilogue, that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is accept an unanswered question. He had once believed that love, friendship, and connection required constant maintenance, that to care for someone meant to chase after them. But now he understood the power of non-attachment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs?" Nathan took those words to heart. He had stopped resisting the natural course of life. When the thought of reaching out crossed his mind, he observed it, acknowledged it, and then let it pass. He had learned that emotions were visitors, not permanent residents. He did not need to act on every feeling, nor did he need to seek comfort in the past. He had built his own peace, one that was not dependent on anyone else. The strength of self-sufficiency. Nathan had spent too much time in the past waiting for validation from others, waiting for an apology, a sign, a reason to believe he mattered. But as he grew, He realized that true confidence comes from within. He no longer needed an external force to tell him he was enough. Epictetus taught, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Nathan had applied this philosophy to his relationships. He did not react impulsively anymore. He did not chase after people who had walked away. He watched, but only as an observer, detached from expectation. He understood that people grow apart, not out of malice, but out of necessity. To force a connection where there was none would be to act against nature, and so he chose to let go, not in bitterness, but in gratitude for the lessons learned. Silence as wisdom. People often mistake silence for indifference, but Nathan knew better. Silence was not avoidance. It was acceptance. It was choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. It was understanding that sometimes words only complicate what the heart has already resolved. If she wanted to reach out, she would. If she didn't, he would not take it personally. He had grown beyond the need for explanations. He had learned to trust the rhythm of life, to allow people to stay if they wished, and to walk away without resentment if they chose. He had found joy in his own company, fulfillment in his own journey. His success, his happiness, his growth, none of it depended on another person, and that, he realized, was true freedom. A Stoic's goodbye. Nathan closed his laptop and exhaled deeply. He did not need to send a message. He did not need to relive the past. He had already made peace with it. He would continue watching, not out of longing, but out of quiet admiration. And if life ever willed their paths to cross again, he would greet her with the same warmth Stoicism had taught him, a warmth that expected nothing in return. Meanwhile, across the city, Eleanor stood on her balcony, gazing at the skyline. A familiar name had crossed her mind. Nathan. She too had seen his successes, his journey, his transformation. She had watched in silence, wondering if he had ever thought about her. But just as he had chosen stillness, so had she. Not out of fear, not out of regret, but out of respect for the distance life had placed between them. They had both learned to let go, to move forward, to find strength within themselves rather than in one another. Eleanor and Nathan, two souls once intertwined, now separate, but not broken. Their stories had diverged, yet they remained connected in a way words could never fully capture. They had both chosen to watch from afar, not with sorrow, but with quiet admiration for what they had become. And so, as the night deepened, Nathan closed his laptop, and Eleanor turned away from her view. Two hearts at peace, moving forward in their own directions, unburdened by what could have been. They were no longer watching, they were living. If you enjoyed this reflection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Stoic insights and life lessons.